The alarms were quiet for once, but the metal kept talking. The Resolute hummed and clicked in the way an old ship does when gravity is honest and the coolant lines are doing their slow, cold prayer. Captain Elias Hale stood in the forward med bay with his palms on the edge of the examination table and watched the respirator rise and fall against a girl's ribs. She was 13 and had an uncomplicated viral cough, but fear had stripped her oxygen like a thief. Her pulse oximeter read 93 and climbing toward 98 with humidified flow. The minor cases came first, because they looked like major cases when panic sharpened their edges. The ship's medic, Dr. Elon, adjusted the nasal cannula with a gentleness that made the tubing whisper. Hale learned long ago that the way a ship breathes tells you more than the readouts. He listened as he counted time with the girl's lungs. 30 seconds. 1 minute. The sound of 1,000 people holding in that same inhale lived in his memory. The mines of Ivaros had been a season of iron snow and thin air and sirens that told you to keep digging. That season had ended with a single order from Offworld: shut down, abandon. The company declared force majeure. Then came the raids. After that came the silence. The Resolute was supposed to be a courier with decent thrust and a paint job that said nothing to anyone. Her official manifest listed antibiotics, field dressings, IV fluids, and portable ultrasound units bound for New Farside. Her compartments held those, neatly strapped and logged. Beneath those compartments, behind false bulkheads and air baffles, were 312 civilians who never made it onto an evacuation docket. A young mother named Mira. A teacher named Cole Weston, who had memorized 32 poems and recited them to the children when the ship lights dimmed to ship night. An old shift boss named Tarek, who had not taken off his boots since the day the mine collapsed and killed 6 of his men. People in thin blankets and borrowed clothes. People whose official files already had a death date. Hale checked the watch he never took off. He felt no romance about it. It was an old steel thing that had belonged to his grandfather, a man who worked beneath Earth's oceans. Time still meant something when the world above forgot you. He looked up when Elon cleared his throat. She is comfortable now. Keep the flow at 2 liters per minute for another hour. Then wean to room air if the cough settles. Lungs are clear. No wheeze. He spoke with a soft Midwestern cadence that rose when he asked a question and fell when he knew an answer. He tugged his sleeve down over a bruise on his wrist. Hale filed that detail without looking at it directly. Thank you. Any new arrivals from the lower sections? 2 sprains. 1 suspected rib fracture. But I want imaging before I call it. A few headaches from dehydration. We are rationing electrolytes. I will not throw saline at people who need balanced solutions. A newborn with feeding trouble, but the latch is improving. He met Hale's eyes. And rumor. That is a symptom I cannot treat. People are saying colonies near the fringe are going quiet. People ask me if the Virex have done a clean sweep, and by clean they mean nothing left worth burying. Hale nodded once and left it there. He stepped from medbay into the corridor, where Commander Ash leaned against the bulkhead with the posture of a man who would leave skin on metal before he left his post. His hair was like a storm had passed through it. The tactical officer Vega stood farther down, dark eyes on a tablet that did not show anything new, because nothing new had happened in 10 minutes. They looked at Hale and he raised a hand to keep them calm. He was never good at speeches when there was real work to do. He walked aft to engineering where Chief Morrow kept their failing parts within shouting distance of working. Morrow wiped a hand on a rag that was more memory than cloth. That second heat exchanger is running hotter than I want. It will hold if nobody asks it to perform miracles. I know you love miracles. I love numbers that do not lie. I tuned the reactor to whisper mode again. Anyone listening will hear a quiet freighter. Anyone listening might already know what we are, Hale said. The words tasted like iron. He had not slept more than an hour at a stretch since they took on the hidden passengers. That was penance and logistics in equal measure. He handed Morrow a short stack of makeshift requisition slips. Half of them were written in children's handwriting. They wanted soap and fresh socks and paper for drawing. He told himself a captain could be the person who said yes to these things, while also preparing for the day he had to say no. He was turning toward the bridge when the comm hummed with a tone that carried static like salt on wind, not the usual chatter. Vega's eyes were already up. She tapped the console. The transmission was a single line of text broken by signal loss. Hale read it 3 times while the ship's breathing tightened. "We see you. Civilians taste like profit." The epithets that followed were not in a language he knew. The cadence felt Virex. The ship fell quieter than a ship with 300 souls aboard should. Hale kept his tone even when he asked for outbound scans and passive listening. He did not want to reveal a searchlight to anyone who might be watching the dark. Ash leaned one shoulder closer. Could be a bluff. Could be the kind of game pirates play when they throw dice into an airlock to see who flinches. Could be one of our own playing games they do not understand. Hale read the line again. Profit. That word in that context was not a bluff. He had seen enough bodies in enough cold rooms to know the shape of that trade. He remembered briefing packets about Virex Dominion raids on fringe worlds. He remembered the way the reports bent around certain details. Donor lists that matched no registry. Medical kits that were surgical but not humanitarian. He remembered hearing from a transport captain who had seen a refrigerated vault labeled with serial numbers and nothing else. He had deadbolted those memories, and now they rattled on their hinges. "We will alter course," he said, not too obvious. A slow drift that looks like a tired ship favoring a stable lane. "Vega, prune any beacon pings. I want our transponder to sound sleepy. Morrow, this is your moment to love me. Make the engine sing like a lullaby. Ash, spread our watch. I want the bow and stern both to feel stared at." He paused. Quietly, Ash. "We do not let 312 people hear us hold our breath." They shifted. The Resolute creaked like an old house settling in new weather. Hale went to the bridge and stood with his hands on the back of the pilot's chair, while the stars unrolled like a map that refused to be folded right. He did not know where the first hit would come from. He only knew what he would do to keep the living alive. The first signs of trouble did not arrive as a ship ghosting into their wake. It arrived as a boy named Mikel who slipped while climbing the ladder to a top bunk and struck his flank and elbow. He swallowed tears and lied that he was fine because new planets are built on the backs of old lies. Elon heard the story and brought him in. The boy winced when Hale lifted his shirt. Bruising already spread in a line along the 10th rib. Lungs sounded clear, but pain spiked when he breathed deep. "Ultrasound first," Elon said. "Portable unit. Point of care. I do not want to irradiate him unless I must." He gelled the probe and placed it. The grainy black and white shimmer showed a sliding pleura and no fluid pooling in the costophrenic angles. No pneumothorax, no hemothorax. He ran the probe along the intercostal spaces. No obvious step deformity, but pain at the 10th rib, correlated with a crack. "Likely a non-displaced rib fracture," Elon said. "We will confirm with a chest X-ray, but the plan is the same either way. Pain control. Incentive spirometry to prevent atelectasis. No heavy lifting for 6 weeks." He looked at Hale. "That is the human timeline. We cannot cheat bone." Hale thanked him out loud, and then thanked him again in the kind of quiet captains keep. When the X-ray machine clicked and printed, the film showed a thin line at the rib that was almost a suggestion. Elon put a mark near it and measured. He showed the boy how to breathe against a little plastic device that made a ball rise in a tube. He told the boy that better breaths now mean fewer days of coughing later. He did not promise no pain. He promised manageable pain and time. The ship turned a fraction. The stars did not complain, but the sensors did. On the second watch, a faint carrier wave grazed their hull and moved on. Vega did not like it. Ash did not like that she did not like it. Hale disliked the entire project of liking or disliking when the work was to keep them invisible. Near ship night, the comm spat another tiny storm of a message. It was more garble than text, but the word profit was cleaner this time. Hale ordered all crew rotations tightened. He kept his voice steady when he visited the hidden compartments and sat among the civilians, while Cole Weston recited a short poem about metal that somehow felt like rain. Hale did not speak. He knew that sometimes the work was to be a chair in a room and nothing more. On his way out, he passed Dr. Elan speaking in low tones to Mira, the young mother, about feeding schedules and hydration. Elan's kindness was consistent. The bruise under his sleeve remained. Dawn was an agreement they made with themselves, since stars do not acknowledge dawn. It came with a new tremor in the deck. Morrow's voice arrived on the channel like gravel poured from a bag. Heat exchanger spiked. Corrected. Small debris in the intake valves. Nothing fatal. Nothing friendly. Hale slept for 40 minutes and dreamed of stairwells that did not end. He woke to Vega saying his name with the kind of stillness that means do not waste a word. He looked at the forward scope and saw a blot that was not a blot. The Virex Dominion ship cut out of warp like a blade pulled slow from a sheath. It was not the kind of ship that talks about peace before it takes what it wants. The Resolute had no business fighting. That did not mean she would not. Hale strapped in and watched their little teeth extend, a dorsal railgun that would not impress anyone sober. 2 forward plasma lances calibrated for warning shots and desperate prayers. Ash took tactical, and Vega ran point with a calm that could steady a cup of coffee on a launch day. Morrow bled power from non-essential systems and fed it to the shields. The first volley from the Virex hit like a thrown table. The deck rocked, and the lights dipped and came back in stuttering obedience. "Report," Hale said, and numbers returned. Shield integrity at 72% after the first hit. Hull microfractures in the port bow, but not through. Reactor conduit 3 showing strain. Engine output stable but anxious. That last word was Morrow's, and Hale let it stand. "Return fire," he said. "Not to win. To remind them that prey can have teeth." The dorsal railgun spoke, and a slug of gentler metal hurled itself through a vacuum that did not care. It struck the Virex ship near an array of antennae. Sparks jumped like fish. The 2 forward lances flicked angry light. There was a reaction like a hiss that Hale felt in his teeth. The second Virex volley came faster and sought joints instead of plates. It bit into the same weakness in their conduit 3. Morrow swore the kind of oath that makes you want to hand the man a new set of tools. Elon called from the med bay with clipped clarity. 2 crew contusions and 1 laceration. The laceration is 4 centimeters and superficial. No arterial involvement. I have it under irrigation. No head injury. No loss of consciousness. He breathed once. A civilian boy with a panic attack in Section H. I am sending a nurse and an oxygen cylinder. We will avoid benzodiazepines unless he begins to hyperventilate to the point of risking syncope. Slow coaching first. He let the channel click closed. The third exchange lasted exactly 27 seconds and cost them 7% more of their shield, and the Virex a small fire near their forward sensor bank. Hale did not want to push to a 4th. He also did not want to negotiate with a mouth he had seen bite. The Virex hailed them and offered talks in a formal register that never quite washed clean the smell of blood. The voice identified itself as a representative of a local command cell. It praised the Resolute for a valiant defense and proposed a right of honored commanders. Hale glanced at Ash, who pulled his mouth into a shape that meant, "I have opinions you will not like. The Virex do not invite. They corner. The right is a story to give their prey a stage to bow on. We play their theater and use their light," Hale said. "We buy time. We let our people catch breath and secure the wounded and check that reactor conduit with eyes that do not blink. We accept." The battle slowed its heartbeat into diplomacy. The Virex ship backed away enough to signal courtesy. Hale ordered the Resolute into a neutral drift and told Morrow to make sure neutral looked like neutral. He told Ellen to prepare to treat concussion if anyone reported headache or nausea after the shocks. He told Vega to monitor every public channel and every whisper between the words. Then he rode a shuttle across the short dark to a ship whose hallways looked like they had been cut with knives that remembered their work. The reception chamber was dim and lined with glass that held relics. A shard of armor with a name burnt into it. A broken scale from a creature Hale could not name. A photograph of a Virex captain shaking hands with a human admiral in a pose that had been staged to look unposed. There were 2 figures waiting. One was a somnarch whose presence had weight without mass. Hale had heard of them. Their field could turn a nervous system into a slow river with a thought. The other was not Virex. The other had elongated skull ridges and patterned skin that caught the light in faint geometry. The eyes were a steady gray. The gaze did not meet his. Rithari, Hale thought, and his stomach pulled tight. A century ago, the Virex had fought the Rethari, and then stopped fighting them, and then hired them in chains. The Virex called the gifted among them Cogvores. It was an ugly word for an uglier use. Hale stepped into the space he was given, as if he had chosen it. He felt the Somnarch's influence as a deepening gravity. His eyelids wanted to choose sleep. His breathing slowed and his tongue felt clumsy in his mouth. He heard his own heart like a large animal careful on a thin bridge. The Rethari stood a meter away, and that felt closer than breath. The neural implant Hale carried sat quiet in his skull, like a small box with thick wiring. It had not been made for a moment like this. Not exactly. It was meant to help with focus and noise during long hauls and disasters, and to scramble any invasive scan long enough to let its owner do something useful. He toggled it with a thought that felt like pushing his thumb against a smooth and hidden switch. The effect was immediate. If the Somnarch's field was a blanket, the implant stitched sand under it. Hale's thoughts rose in a churn. Not a barricade. More like a carnival where every ride started at once. The Cogvore stepped into that and stumbled. The Virex had expected a human mind to bend like a reed and lay bare its bank. The Cogvore expected to find a stack of memories that could be brushed through in order. Instead, he fell into a monsoon. Tactical maps smeared with the smell of coffee that had been left too long on a hot plate. Childhood mornings with the sound of freight trains and the ache of growing bones and a loose tooth that never wanted to let go. The creak of ship bulkheads in the night at 14, when Hale was a junior tech who listened when he could not sleep. Songs with bad lyrics that had lodged in his head like seeds and grew into vines at the worst times. Procedural checklists barked by instructors whose breath smelled like mint and worry. The Cogvore lifted a hand to steady himself against a table that was not there. His lips parted because the Somnarch's field wanted to claim voice and body. He had to run around it to gather breath. He pushed deeper. He saw a battle plan from a drill that had gone wrong. Suddenly a smell of wet socks. He tried to isolate the plan. A coffee stain spread over it. He almost laughed. He had not laughed at work since he was 8 years old, and the Virex took him to a compound with bright lights and broken toys and told him he would live if he read minds. They monitored him with a small device at the base of his skull that would deliver pain if he wandered. It hummed now like a bee across a field. Do your task. He moved sideways through the human storm, and that is where he found the thing under the noise. It was not a map or a joke. It was a color, the pale of fluorescent lighting on skin. Skin that had seen too little sun and too much fear. It flooded his vision. A narrow compartment with vents taped to look like solid metal, a woman holding a baby, a teacher with poems. A man who had not taken off his boots. He felt the breath of 312 people, and something tightened in his chest like a fist closing. He had been sent to pull useful secrets. He felt instead as if he had walked into a hospital wing where the floor was a ledger for a butcher. He tasted the word profit and bile rose. The Virex had used that word before, after raids that left no survivors and too many missing. He knew the quiet market that waited for cold containers with warm parts. He had read Men and Women while surgeons in other rooms did tidy crimes. He knew how close the genetic match on Ivaro's civilians would be for certain clients who could pay for hearts that failed gracefully. He had been 8 when his parents were dragged one way and he another. He remembered a gray room where his birthday happened, and nobody said happy birthday. He had been given a cake without a candle, and told to read a man who had lost an arm in a mining accident. Read him and tell the Virex where he hid the backup codes for an ore drone. He had done it because a hand on the back of his neck threatened a pain that could divide a person from himself. He heard the Somnarch's voice in his head the way one hears thunder through walls. Proceed. The human is adequate. Strip him clean. The Cogvore should have pressed forward. The implant kept throwing trash into his eyes. A memory of a teacher telling young Hale to sit still, because not every problem can be met with movement. The smell of fried plantains from a ship galley after a good haul. A bruise on a medic's wrist and the way he tried to hide it, and the way a captain noticed without speaking. Then again the small bright image of a baby sleeping while people breathed too quietly in a compartment that did not deserve to be a home. The Cogvore made a choice. He had not chosen anything significant in years. It was a minor rebellion that changed a path. He released the link with a practiced gesture that looked like a blink. He stepped back, and felt the Somnarch's field rake across his spine in warning. He met Hale's eyes for the first time. The face of a man who had sworn to keep people breathing, even if he had to lie to a galaxy. The Cogvore sent a look that said, "Not today, and I am sorry," and run. He waited for punishment and received none visible. The Virex took victory in the pretense of civility. The rite concluded with empty honors. Hale said the right formal phrases with the careful diction of a man leaving a room without showing his back. He rode the shuttle back to the Resolute with a headache that grew in a careful spiral behind his eye. He vomited once in his cabin, and Elon handed him an antiemetic and stern water. Elon checked his pupils with a light and did not like the dilation lag. Mild concussion possible. Monitor for worsening headache. No dizziness at present. Avoid sleep for 2 hours. The rhythm of med school lived in him, and he delivered it gently. Hale showered hard and sat on the edge of his bed and told himself the Rithari had looked like a man who did not belong in his own skin. He did not know if that mattered. He knew a dam had not broken today, and that mattered. Hours later, a short encrypted message sat in the comm buffer. Not Virex code. A compact knot of data that Vega read once and then reread carefully. Hide your civilians. You are being hunted by more than us. The last words iced his blood. More than us. Hale reviewed what the Virex had known before the rite. They had mentioned their damaged reactor conduit 3. They had named a fuel stop he had only projected and never filed. They knew a detail about the layout of the lower decks that only 5 people aboard had discussed. Hale, Ash, Vega, Morrow, Elon. One of them had leaked. If it was Elon, then God help him. Hale carried the thought like a coal. He did not speak it. He laid the trap. Hale gathered the 5 in a closed room that never quite forgot the smell of oil. He briefed them on the situation with the simplicity of a clean blade. They were being hunted by more than the Virex. They needed to disappear. He slid a simple lie into the center of the table as a coin. The Resolute would divert to Talvith for engine calibration. Talvith did not exist. It was a name from a story he had read at 12 about a moon that sang. He placed it as if it mattered. Only these 5 would know the coordinates. Ash nodded like a man who does not nod until the math is good. Morrow scratched a note on his wrist with a stub of pencil. Vega asked 2 questions about heat signatures and drift patterns. Elon looked tired. His bruise had faded to yellow. His fingers tugged at his cuff as if it itched. He asked whether Hale wanted to set the calibrations at 1% tolerance or 2. Hale said 2. He dismissed them and kept his breathing slow. 7 hours later, a Virex scout appeared at Talveth's coordinates. It cut into real space like a fin. First Ash let out the curse he kept for moments like this. Then Hale ordered the engines to idle low. Then he walked to the comm logs with hands that did not shake because shaking would be for later. The transmission had gone out in a compressed packet piggybacked on medical data. It looked like a tiny abnormal heartbeat on a long, quiet cardiac strip, originating from Dr. Elon's console. The logs did not lie. They did not care how gentle a man's hands were. He found Elon in the medbay measuring out pediatric doses of amoxicillin. There is no romance in the way the world is saved, Hale thought. Sometimes it looks like a paste of white medicine pressed into a plastic syringe. He waited until Elon finished, and capped the dose, and set it aside for Mira's baby. Then he showed him the log. Elon did not fight the numbers. He pressed his palms flat on the counter and hung his head. He spoke in a low, raw voice. They promised safe passage for my family on Earth. They said they only wanted harmless details. Never names, never locations of people, only ship systems. I thought it was something an engineer would tell anyone while drinking. You know when we tell tall tales about our rigs? I thought I was paying for safety with trivia. He made a sound that did not belong in his throat. Then I learned what they trade. I learned what profit means in their language. I stopped. It was too late. Hale held the silence the way a surgeon holds a scalpel. Careful. Certain. He did not yell. He did not bargain. He told Elon exactly what his leak had endangered. 312 civilians. A boy with a rib fracture that would take 6 weeks to heal. A baby who needed measured doses. An old man who had not taken off his boots because dread makes rituals. Elon nodded and nodded until it looked like agreement might break him. Then he stopped and looked at Hale with a realization that hurt more than the bruise. "You will confine me." Hale said yes. Ash placed him under guard with no ceremony. There would be a tribunal later. The damage was contained now. Hale watched Elon go and felt a strange grief. He had seen men break for better reasons. He had seen worse betrayals. That did not dull the taste of this one. He returned to the bridge and checked the readings. The Viric scout lingered like a shark that has eaten enough to stay interested. It sent no hail. It watched. Hale ordered the Resolute to drift away like a bored freighter, with nothing on board but gauze and pills. Inside he wrote a letter to Elon's family in his head, and then burned it because there would be a later for justice, but the present belonged to survival. The ship's work did not stop. Elon's nurse, Hani, a quiet woman from a blue desert on a world named Benna, took over triage. She was competent and refused to bargain with compassion. She used the ultrasound to check Mira's abdomen when Mira complained of cramping that she had been hiding for 2 days. Pregnant again, barely, 6 weeks maybe. Hani set her on bed rest and increased her fluids and told her to report any spotting. She consulted with Hale because until a tribunal, Elon's charts could not be assumed complete. It was not cruelty, it was caution. The Rathari Cogvore did not appear again. He was back on his ship with the Somnarch's shadow crossing his shoulders like weather. He watched a tech review data from the encounter and knew the fields they would query. He knew whose mind they would seek again if given the chance. He waited until shift change on his own ship when eyes went dull and the pain device at the base of his skull took a small nap. He crafted a tiny packet of data and pushed it into a civilian relay that Virex used for boredom. It left the ship and cut across dark. It entered the Resolute's buffer exactly when he wanted. Hide your civilians. More than us. The act should have earned him punishment. It earned him a quiet nothing. That scared him more. Hale lay down after 20-hour wakefulness and let sleep take him for a short time. He woke with the taste of metal in his mouth and a sore neck that promised to become a headache. He drank water and visited the boy with the rib fracture. The boy hated the spirometer. Hale told him that courage sometimes looks like boring breaths every 2 hours. The boy laughed and then winced, and the laugh turned into a hiss. Pain medicine took the edge. They discussed how long 6 weeks would feel. The boy said forever. Hale said it would be 6 weeks, not forever. He said it with the kind of surety a captain owes, even when he does not feel it. On the 3rd day after the rite, the Virex ship limped away. It had its own wounds to lick. It broadcast a public farewell that dripped courtesy. It mentioned mutual respect and future collaboration. Hale cut the channel before the sentence ended because he did not want their words living rent-free in his ship. He set a new course for New Farside that ran far from the known lanes. They would arrive later than promised. There would be consequences. He accepted them. He chose a route that made them nearly invisible to casual scanners and too boring to intercept. His engineer grumbled that boredom requires a better power distributor than excitement. Hale asked him to do the impossible again. Morrow did it and charged double in sarcasm. There was a brief incident that tested their medical edges. A loader slipped and struck his forearm against a pallet. Pain flared and swelling began immediately. Hani ordered a plain film. The X-ray showed a non-angulated transverse fracture of the distal radius. She placed a sugar tong splint, checked circulation and sensation distal to the injury, and advised elevation and ice 20 minutes per hour for the first 24 hours. She scheduled a follow-up film in 1 week to ensure no displacement. She told him that bone heals in 6 to 8 weeks, depending on age and fuel, and that she would not permit him to lift more than a book in that time. He objected. She reminded him that pain was information, not a test of manhood. He nodded and tried to smile and failed, and that was fine. Hale spent time with the hidden civilians, not because it was show, but because the anxiety ran hot and constant. He answered questions as straight as he could. He did not promise they were safe. He promised he would spend himself to keep them alive. He promised that the ship would not stop for anything that did not feed that purpose. He invited Cole Weston to host open recitations. He sat in the back and understood only half the words and all the human effect. He thought often of the Rathari. He remembered the exact second when the alien's eyes met his. There had been fear and resolve, and something like a joke told at the wrong funeral. Hale told himself that if he ever had the chance, he would put his hands on the device at the base of that man's skull and take it off. He knew chances like that do not arrive clean. If a person is being hunted by more than one predator, the logic says choose a path that confuses both. Hale engaged that logic fully. The message had been simple, but it had cut in a new direction. More than us. The Virex were not the only teeth in the water. He considered the other suspects. Organ brokers with different flags, states that wanted deniable assets, privateers, old enemies with new names. He could not see them clearly. He felt them as a general pressure like the air before a storm. He tightened the circle on his crew and told them exactly what he expected. Command decisions would be made with unlovely speed. Medical decisions would respect the human body's clock. Nobody would die of a preventable infection because they rationed antibiotics wrong. Nobody would suffer an avoidable pulmonary embolism because they kept someone bedbound without prophylaxis. Hani initiated a simple program for high-risk civilians. Early ambulation for those long prone, hydration tract, compression stockings for a few elders with swollen ankles. She took blood pressures and found 3 hypertensive men who had been rationing their medication out of fear of running out. She adjusted doses and spaced them with care. She asked Hale for permission to open another crate from their official supplies. He said yes and signed a requisition that would cause a headache later when New Farside audited their delivery. He did it anyway. They cut power signatures so low that Vega measured their life with a ruler instead of a clock. Morrow curled around his reactor readouts like a man sheltering a campfire in wind. Ash trained a small cadre of volunteers from the civilians to help with watch. He gave them simple tasks. Count stars in a sector. Note anything that blinks wrong. Do not chase a wrong blink. Tell me and I will chase it. On day 5 after the rite, the boy with the rib fracture reported increased pain with deep inspiration. Hani listened and did not characterize it as a whine. She checked his temperature. Low-grade fever. Oxygen saturation dipped to 94 from 98 at rest. She ordered a chest X-ray for possible developing pneumonia. The film showed a faint patchy opacity at the right lower lobe that could be early consolidation. She began amoxicillin clavulinate and increased incentive spirometry frequency. She kept him upright and walked him with gentle coaching. She explained that uncomplicated pneumonia in a healthy adolescent usually improves in a few days with antibiotics and breathing exercises, but that they must watch for worsening signs like higher fever or respiratory distress. She looped Hale in, and he came to sit for 5 minutes that felt like an hour to the boy. Timelines were kept honest. Pain was not dismissed. The next day the fever eased and the oxygen saturation climbed. By day 4 of treatment his cough loosened, and he laughed without wincing for the first time since the injury. Hani let him hold the spirometer like a trophy, and he did not mind that the ball rose only to the middle marker. 2 days later, the loader with the forearm fracture returned for his 1-week film. The X-ray showed maintained alignment. No callus yet visible. Splint remained appropriate. Hani rescheduled for a cast once swelling resolved. She told him again 6 to 8 weeks. He tried bargaining. She gave him a look that said no, and also I am fond of you and want your arm to work when you are old. The Virex scout shadowed them for a full day, and then snapped away like a thought a person finally stops thinking. Hale did not believe in omens, but he did believe in gaps where predators reset. He used the day to run a full diagnostic on the reactor conduit 3 while on a long elliptical drift. Morrow found hairline stress in a coupling that had not failed but had been thinking about it. He changed it out in a controlled shutdown window with a practice team. He tested pressures and flow. He signed his name to the work with a grease pencil, because the act felt like jurisdiction over fate. They approached the last leg to New Farside from a vector that would not make sense to anyone who thought of the galaxy as lines on a chart. Vega kept her listening screens open. The channels were mostly empty. There was one brief blip, a signal that sounded like gasping. It might have been a damaged beacon. It might have been a trap. Hale logged it and kept course. Before final approach, he met Ash in the small wardroom where the coffee was always 12 minutes too old. They spoke without ceremony about the tribunal that would wait on the far side of safety. Elon would stand before people who would judge him fairly or imperfectly. Hale would present the log and the damage contained, and the lives risked, and the man he had known before the log spoke. He did not know what sentence would fall. He knew the ship had needed a doctor who did not trade. He knew it had gotten one with a fault that had cut too near the bone. He was not at peace with any of it. He did not require peace. They came in quiet to New Farside. The Port Authority hailed them with the cheerful boredom of civil service on a frontier that learned to sound happy about rationed normalcy. Hale answered with a freighter captain's sigh and a joke about paperwork that made the operator on the other end laugh into his hand. The Resolute requested a remote bay with extra ventilation for medical logistical reasons. The request was granted because the operator did not like the sweat he felt on his neck when he looked at Hale's ship. Hale docked with a sigh that might have been gratitude if one listened carefully. Unloading the official cargo took 4 hours of slow work. Hani signed for the crates she had opened and marked them with careful notes about doses already administered. She showed the New Farside pharmacist the charts for the 3 hypertensive men and asked for a refill allotment. The pharmacist frowned and then nodded. The machinery of mercy moved 1 inch and did not squeal. Hale kept the hidden compartments sealed while dock hands tramped by. He assigned trusted crew to stand as if they were standing for nothing at all. When the last crate left and the bay doors shut, he gave the order to open. People walked into light that was not ship light. The smell of a planet moved into their lungs. Some cried. Some did not know how to do anything but stand still. Hale called the colony coordinator and asked for a room that could fit 312 people and the silence between them. He turned to Cole Weston and asked him to stand with a list and a pencil. Names were checked off a ledger that had been a list of the dead and was no longer accurate. The work of resettlement began with 1,000 small actions that looked nothing like heroics. Housing assignments on paper, medical screenings scheduled, vaccinations updated. Hani and a New Farside nurse set up a corner of a hall and took blood pressures and temperatures and histories. They flagged 3 cases for immediate follow-up. A woman with a soft systolic murmur and shortness of breath on exertion. She might have rheumatic heart disease or an uncorrected congenital defect. She had lived hard on Ivaros. The plan was an echocardiogram within the week. A man with hematuria that had not been evaluated. They sent a urine sample to the colony lab and scheduled a renal ultrasound. A child with a limp from an old ankle sprain that had never been rehabilitated. Hani taught her simple exercises. She told her that ankles do not forgive poor work. She gave her a timeline of 2 to 4 weeks for improved range and 6 to 8 weeks for full return to running with proper physical therapy. The tribunal would happen at New Farside in a room that used to be a school and would be a school again. Elon stood, with his hands folded around his own wrist, as if taking his own pulse. He admitted the facts without dressing them up. He did not blame a shadowy they. He said, "I thought I was buying safety with trivia, and I was wrong." He asked to continue practicing under supervision for the sake of the civilians he had already treated. He did not ask for forgiveness. The panel weighed the evidence and decided on suspension from independent duty for the duration of the voyage and referral to a wider Dominion inquiry with representation by a legal advocate from New Farside. It was a middle path that satisfied almost nobody. Hale accepted it because the ship still required a medic's hands for basic tasks under Hani's oversight, and because punishment that broke a man with skills was a poor investment in survival. Hale filed the required docking reports with the kind of detail that keeps auditors sleepy. He logged the slow route and the fuel irregularities and the fight that technically never happened. He did not log 312 civilians. He had already arranged with the colony coordinator to fold them into the manifest of a separate relief carrier that had arrived with a food shipment from a charitable union. On paper, the Avaros civilians entered New Farside on a different day on a different ship. As far as the official galaxy was concerned, they were as boring as anyone else who arrives on a frontier and decides to live anyway. He returned to the ship at night when the bay was quiet. He sat in his cabin and wrote out a letter addressed to no one and left it unsent. It began with the words, "I met a man who read minds and found mine too loud." He told the rest of it like a story a grandfather might tell a child who wanted to know why the world is bent in places. He ended with a promise he could keep. "If I ever have the chance to free you, I will take it." He folded the letter and put it in the small box with his grandfather's watch. He closed the lid. The box was heavy with time. On departure day, he walked the length of the ship and touched the metal at intervals as if taking its temperature. The reactor conduit 3 purred without a stutter. Morrow met him with a grin that was half fatigue and half insult to entropy. Vega had eyes you could set a level on. Ash handed him a list of minor repairs and a note that said in his sharp letters that he had checked on the boy with the rib fracture who was on day 15 now and bored of healing. Bored of healing was a good sign. Elin nodded from the medbay and did not ask for mercy. Hani told Hale that the loader's fracture looked clean and that they would convert to a short arm cast tomorrow if swelling stayed down. She explained again the time course and the risks if he tried to carry crates. Hale said he would station him on light duty near the comms room. He took the note and made it happen. They loosed from New Farside, with a course that was longer by a week. It avoided a region that Vega had grown to dislike for no single reason, and 100 small ones. Hale chose the slow path because the message from the Cogvore was still in his bones, more than us. He did not like the shape of whatever else hunted. He did not pretend to know it. He avoided it and called that wisdom. On the 3rd night out, he stood alone on the bridge and let the starfield breathe at him. He thought about the right and the field that had tried to turn him off like a lamp, and the voice that had not spoken aloud but had said no in a way that mattered. He imagined the Rathari standing in a corridor on a ship where pain lived in a device and dignity lived in quiet choices. Hale raised his right hand and placed it over his chest like a salute and a promise. The gesture had no audience. It was not for show. It was for himself and a man he might never see again. He returned to his cabin and slept. He dreamed not of stairwells or alarms, but of a beach he knew from a childhood trip, where the sand was white and the water made a sound that could be mistaken for a ship if one was desperate. In the dream he watched a child build a fortress, and a wave take it, and the child laugh and build again. He woke with the taste of salt, and laughed once before the day took him. The ship moved on. The civilians on New Farside began the work of becoming citizens and neighbors. The boy's rib healed right on schedule. The loader's cast itched, and then did not. Mira's baby grew, and learned to grip a finger with surprising force. Elon stood his tribunal again, under wider eyes, and accepted a sentence that let him practice medicine under supervision for a time, while he participated in a program for security failures and moral injury. It was an imperfect justice, and perhaps the only kind available. Months later, a small parcel arrived in a drop box. Hale checked when the Resolute next passed near a certain relay. The parcel contained a piece of patterned fabric and a note with a single line. "We are not only what they make of us. No name. No return." Hale put the fabric in the same box as the letter he had not sent. He did not stop hoping that someday a hallway would open, and he could take the device off the back of a man's neck and hand him a cup of coffee that had been brewed well and not forgotten on a hot plate. The Resolute returned to her work. She moved medical supplies and bulk food and coil wire that smiled when it was laid true. She carried fewer secrets now. She carried the quiet knowledge that some days you do not win and you do not lose. You carry people through and you do not get caught, and that is enough. Hale kept moving. He kept people breathing. He made sure nobody found those 312 again except as living names on a census and loud voices in a school hall. He allowed himself one superstition. He would stand in the forward med bay sometimes and listen as the ship talked to itself. When the metal spoke in the careful language of old machines, he would answer in his head, and the voice that never stops talking would tell him the same thing every time. Keep going, keep going, keep going.